The headache had started as a dull throb behind his right eye, a quiet complaint that had, over the course of 2 excruciating morning meetings, crescendoed into a full-blown percussive assault. Liam Sterling, a man who prided himself on his stoicism and an almost perfect attendance record, finally surrendered. At 9:45 a.m. on a Monday, he told his boss, Julian Croft, that he was unwell and needed to go home. Julian, all polished teeth and patronizing sympathy, had clapped him on the shoulder. "Of course, Liam. Go rest up. We need our number cruncher at full capacity." The condescension was a familiar flavor, one Liam had learned to swallow without grimacing. The drive home was a blur of throbbing temples and watery vision. He let himself into the quiet, sun-drenched apartment he shared with his wife, Clara, the silence a welcome balm. He kicked off his shoes, loosened his tie, and headed straight for the master bathroom, fumbling in the medicine cabinet for the strongest painkillers he could find. As his fingers closed around the small bottle, his eyes caught something out of place. On the gleaming white marble of the countertop, nestled between Clara's collection of expensive perfumes and his own single, unassuming bottle of aftershave, sat a bottle of Cologne he had never seen before. It was a heavy, geometric flask of dark glass, capped with a silver emblem that glinted in the morning light. The label was minimalist, the brand name Valerius, etched in a severe, elegant font. Liam knew the brand. Julian wore Valerius. He drenched himself in it, a scent as loud and arrogant as the man himself. It was a fragrance that announced its own price tag, a blend of sandalwood, oud, and something metallic and cold that clung to the air in the boardroom long after Julian had left. Liam picked up the bottle. It was cool and heavy in his hand, a foreign object in the sanctuary of his home. He uncapped it and, against his better judgment, brought it to his nose. The scent was immediate, unmistakable. It was the smell of his boss, the smell of Julian Croft's tailored suits, his corner office, his condescending praise. A wave of nausea, entirely separate from his migraine, washed over him. He stood there for a long moment, the heavy glass in his hand, the pounding in his head forgotten, replaced by a cold, quiet roar in his ears. He thought his life was a carefully constructed edifice of mutual respect and quiet partnership. He didn't know it was a house of cards, and someone else's cologne was the wind that would bring it all down. Within days, this single, misplaced object would set off a chain of events that would unravel everything he thought he knew, and reveal a strength inside himself that no one, least of all his wife and his boss, had ever imagined. This is a story about betrayal, but more than that, it's a story about the quiet power that lies hidden behind a humble exterior. Have you ever felt underestimated? Like people only see the surface and miss who you truly are? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories where the underdog finally gets their day, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss how this ends. Liam placed the bottle back on the counter, his movements precise, deliberate. His hands were steady, a stark contrast to the maelstrom inside him. The initial shock was already crystallizing into a chilling clarity. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a gift Clara had bought for him. She knew he found such extravagant scents overpowering. It wasn't a friend's, left behind by accident. They hadn't had guests in weeks. There was only one logical explanation, and it was so monstrous, so profoundly shattering, that a lesser man might have refused to see it. But Liam's mind, the same analytical instrument that could track the subtle ebb and flow of global markets, could not unsee this data point. It was an anomaly that demanded a new hypothesis. His hypothesis was that his wife, Clara, was having an affair with his boss, Julian Croft. He walked out of the bathroom and stood in the center of their living room. The apartment, usually a space of comfort, now felt like a stage set. Every object, the plush sofa where they watched movies, the dining table where they shared meals, the framed photos of their wedding on the mantelpiece, seemed mocking, props in a play where he had been unknowingly miscast. He looked at a photo of him and Clara in Tuscany, smiling, her arm looped through his. Had she been thinking of Julian then? Had his compliments and expensive gifts already begun their insidious work, chipping away at the foundation of their marriage? He thought back, sifting through memories, re-examining them under this harsh new light. Julian's invitations, always extended to you and the lovely Clara. Clara's sudden interest in the company's quarterly reports, which she'd previously found mind-numbingly dull. The way Julian's eyes would linger on her at the annual holiday party. A look Liam had once dismissed as flirtatious charm but now saw as proprietary. Her recent excuses for working late, a new project at the gallery, now seemed flimsy, transparent. The little gifts that had started appearing. A silk scarf she claimed she'd found on sale, a pair of earrings she'd said were a bonus from her boss. Liam's salary was comfortable, more than comfortable, but it didn't run to the kind of casual luxury Julian represented. He had been blind. Not because he was a fool, but because he had chosen to trust. He had built his life on the assumption of his wife's fidelity, on the bedrock of their shared history. He saw now that he had been standing on a fault line. He walked into his home office, a small, meticulously organized room. On his desk, next to his sleek work laptop, sat a simple, worn, leather-bound ledger. It looked like an antique, an anachronism in his digital world. No one, not even Clara, knew what it was for. She thought it was a sentimental affectation, a journal he never wrote in. In reality, it was the only true record of his financial state. For the past 10 years, while working diligently for Julian's firm, Liam had been playing his own game. He wasn't just a number cruncher, he was a master strategist. Using a proprietary algorithm he'd developed in his spare time, he had been making small, strategic investments, compounding his own money with a quiet, ruthless efficiency. The world saw Liam Sterling, the reliable, underpaid analyst. The man who drove a sensible sedan and lived in a nice but not extravagant apartment. Clara saw a dependable, slightly boring husband who provided a stable life. Julian saw a useful, unthreatening cog in his machine. None of them saw the man who was, according to the neat, handwritten entries in this old leather book, independently, staggeringly wealthy. He had amassed a fortune that would make Julian's own look like pocket change. He had done it not for the sake of luxury, but for the sake of freedom. The freedom to one day walk away from men like Julian Croft. He had always imagined that day would be on his own terms, a quiet retirement into a life of peace and integrity. He had never imagined it would be a weapon in a war he didn't know he was fighting. He ran a hand over the worn leather. The anger was there, a cold, hard knot in his gut, but beneath it was a profound sense of sorrow. The life he had been building, the future he had envisioned with Clara, was an illusion. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was a betrayal of a shared dream. She had not only chosen another man, she had chosen a set of values that were the antithesis of everything he stood for. Status over substance, wealth as a weapon, arrogance as a virtue. He sat down, the headache a distant echo. The pain had been replaced by a singular, chilling purpose. They had underestimated him. They had mistaken his quietness for weakness, his patience for passivity, his humility for a lack of ambition. They had made a grave error. He would not scream or rage. He would not confront Clara with tearful accusations. That was not his way. He would do what he had always done. He would be patient. He would gather data. He would analyze the situation. And then, at a time and place of his own choosing, he would make his move. The game had changed, and he would write the new rules. The days that followed were a masterclass in self-control. Liam moved through his life as if nothing had changed, a performance so convincing he sometimes felt he was watching himself from a great distance. He went back to work the next day, his headache gone, replaced by an unnerving sense of calm. He greeted Julian with his usual quiet deference, watching the way his boss's eyes crinkled with smug satisfaction. Julian saw an employee. Liam saw a problem to be solved. When he came home each evening, he greeted Clara with a kiss. He listened to her talk about her day at the art gallery, her voice animated as she described a difficult client or a new exhibition. He searched her face for any sign of guilt, any flicker of the truth in her eyes, but found nothing. She was a better actress than he had imagined. Or perhaps, He thought with a pang of bitterness. It was simply that easy for her to lie to him. The cologne bottle had vanished from the bathroom counter. Neither of them mentioned it. It was a silent, unacknowledged bomb between them. His confirmation came 2 days later. Clara was in the shower, her phone lying on the bedside table. It buzzed. Liam, who had never once in their 8 years of marriage felt the urge to look at her phone, picked it up. The screen lit up with a notification. A text from Jay. The message was short, but it was enough. Tonight was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. Valerius is our scent now. Liam placed the phone back down, his heart a block of ice in his chest. Our scent. The possessiveness of it, the casual erasure of his own presence in their home, in their life was breathtaking. He felt the cold anger rise again, but he pushed it down, compressing it into fuel. Emotion was a liability. Strategy was everything. That weekend, they were due to attend a dinner party at Julian's house. It was an annual event, a command performance for Julian's senior staff and a few select clients. In previous years, Liam had found the evenings tedious, a performance of sycophancy set against the backdrop of Julian's ostentatious wealth. This year, he looked forward to it. It would be a research opportunity. Julian's home was less a house than a monument to his own ego, a sprawling glass and steel structure perched on a hill overlooking the city. It was filled with modern art that was more expensive than expressive and furniture that looked designed to be admired rather than used. Julian greeted them at the door, resplendent in a tailored blazer, the scent of Valerius preceding him like an honor guard. "Liam, glad you're feeling better?" he boomed, clapping Liam's shoulder again in that gesture of feigned camaraderie. Then he turned to Clara, and his entire demeanor shifted. His eyes softened, his voice dropped half an octave. "Clara, you look absolutely stunning." He took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it for a fraction of a second too long. "Thank you, Julian," Clara said. Her cheeks flushed with a pleasure that made Liam's stomach turn. "Your home is as beautiful as ever." "It's just a house," Julian said with a dismissive wave, a practiced bit of false modesty. "It's the people that make it a home." His eyes were still on Clara. The entire evening was an exercise in humiliation, a series of 1,000 tiny cuts. Liam watched, detached, an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. He saw the way Clara's hand brushed Julian's arm as she laughed at one of his mediocre jokes. He saw the shared glances, the coded smiles, the subtle language of intimacy that they thought was invisible to the world. They were careless, cocooned in the arrogance of their secret. Dinner was served on a long, polished mahogany table. Julian, at the head, held court. He spoke loudly about a recent acquisition, a corporate raid he'd orchestrated with what he called surgical precision. He was a predator, and he gloried in it. Then he raised his glass of wine. "A toast," he announced, his gaze sweeping the table before landing on Liam. "To Liam, the quiet engine in our machine, the man who dots the I's and crosses the T's. We'd all be lost in the wilderness of big ideas without men like him to keep the spreadsheets in order." The table chuckled politely. It was framed as a compliment, but the subtext was clear. Liam was a follower, a functionary, a man without vision. He was necessary, but unimportant. Liam looked across the table at Clara. She was smiling, a tight social smile, her eyes fixed on Julian. She didn't defend him. She didn't even seem to notice the insult. In that moment, something inside Liam finally broke. It wasn't his heart that had already been fractured. It was his hope, the faint, lingering hope that this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, that the woman he had loved for a decade was still in there somewhere. She wasn't. She had been replaced by this smiling stranger who basked in the reflected glory of a man who despised her husband. Liam raised his own glass. "To diligence," he said, his voice even and calm. He met Julian's eyes across the table. "It's often the small, overlooked details that determine the final outcome." Julian's smile faltered for a second. He searched Liam's face for a sign of insubordination, but found only his usual placid expression. He laughed, a little too loudly. Exactly. The details. Well said, Liam. But Liam wasn't looking at Julian anymore. He was looking at Clara, and for the first time, she met his gaze and saw something she didn't recognize. A coolness, a distance, a flicker of her smile died, and a tiny line of confusion appeared between her brows. It was the first sign that the ground beneath her feet was beginning to shift. Liam took a sip of his wine. He had his data. The hypothesis was confirmed, the variables understood. The next phase could begin. The drive home from Julian's party was silent. The air in the car was thick with unspoken words. Clara kept glancing at him, a nervous energy radiating from her that was entirely new. He was usually the one to fill these silences, to ask about her evening, to comment on the food or the conversation. Tonight, he said nothing. He simply drove, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Did you have a nice time?" she finally asked, her voice sounding unnaturally high. "It was informative," Liam replied, without looking at her. "Informative? What does that mean?" "I learned a lot," he said, and left it at that. The ambiguity hung between them, unsettling her. Good, he thought. Let her be unsettled. Let her wonder what he knew. Let her feel, for the first time, the anxiety of uncertainty that he had been living with for days. When they got home, she tried to bridge the gap. Julian was in rare form tonight, wasn't he? That toast was a little much. It was a weak attempt to align herself with him, to pretend they were on the same side. "He's a confident man," Liam said, his voice devoid of emotion as he unbuttoned his shirt. "He respects you, you know," she offered. "He always says you're the most reliable analyst at the firm." Reliable. The word was a cage. He was reliable, dependable, stable. He was a piece of solid, unexciting furniture in the grand design of their lives. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you want, Clara? A reliable man?" The question caught her off guard. "What are you talking about?" "Of course. I married you, didn't I?" "Yes," he said softly. "You did." He went into the bathroom and closed the door, leaving her standing alone in the bedroom, a profound sense of unease finally dawning on her face. The next Monday, Liam began his true work. His professional life had always been a cover. While he diligently managed portfolios for Julian's clients, his real intellectual energy was focused on his own. Now, he turned that formidable analytical power towards a new target, Julian Croft. He knew, with an instinct honed by years of studying corporate behavior, that men like Julian, men who projected such an aura of invincibility, always had secrets. Their arrogance was a shield, but it also made them careless. He started with the publicly available information: company filings, shareholder reports, press releases. He spent his evenings not watching movies with Clara, but poring over data on his personal laptop in his study, building a complex financial model of Julian's empire. He treated Julian Croft Holdings like a puzzle, and he began to find the edges of the pieces that didn't quite fit. There were acquisitions that made no strategic sense, shell corporations in obscure jurisdictions, and a pattern of stock sales by Julian himself that seemed just a little too perfectly timed ahead of market-moving announcements. It was a start, but it was all circumstantial. He needed more. He needed a view from the inside. He needed someone who saw everything, heard everything, and had been rendered just as invisible as he had been. He needed Julian's executive assistant. Isabelle Dubois was a woman in her late 40s who had been with Julian for over 15 years. She was hyper-competent, discreet to a fault, and possessed a glacial composure that nothing seemed to penetrate. Julian treated her with the casual contempt he reserved for all his underlings, oblivious to the fact that she was the one who truly ran his life, managing his schedule, screening his calls, and burying his mistakes. Liam had always been polite to Isabelle, treating her with a respect that was rare in the shark tank of the firm's upper floors. He hoped he had earned a measure of her trust. He decided to approach her not at the office, where eyes were everywhere, but on neutral ground. He knew she volunteered at a community garden on Saturday mornings. The following weekend, feigning a new interest in urban horticulture, he showed up. He found her tending a bed of heirloom tomatoes, her face relaxed and free of the tension it always wore at the office. "Isabel," he said, offering a warm smile, "I didn't know you were a gardener." She looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes before her professional mask slipped back into place. "Liam, what are you doing here?" "My wife has been trying to get me to take up a hobby," he said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "Something to get me out of the house. I thought this looked peaceful." She studied him for a moment, her gaze sharp and intelligent. She knew, perhaps better than anyone, the dynamics of the office. She had seen the way Julian treated him, the way Clara looked at her boss. She was a woman who noticed the details. "It is peaceful," she said finally, her tone neutral. "But it's also a lot of hard work." "I don't mind hard work," Liam said, his voice quiet but firm. "I've been thinking a lot lately about what you plant and what you harvest. About weeding out the things that choke the life out of everything else." He let the metaphor hang in the air. It was a risk, a subtle signal that he was talking about more than just tomatoes. Isabel's expression didn't change, but he saw a new watchfulness in her eyes. She straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. "You have to be careful," she said, her voice low. "Some weeds have very deep roots. You try to pull them out, you might end up destroying the whole garden. Or," Liam countered gently, "you might save it." He didn't push further. He had planted a seed. He spent the next hour working quietly on a neglected patch of herbs nearby, making small talk about the weather and the challenges of growing basil in the city. When it was time to leave, he walked over to her. "It was good to see you, Isabel." "You too, Liam," she said. As he turned to go, she added, almost as an afterthought, "Julian is hosting the quarterly investors' call from his home office next Tuesday. He prefers it for the acoustics. He's asked me to set up a secure video link. He can be very particular about the technology." It was a non sequitur, a seemingly random piece of information. But Liam understood. A secure video link. A home office. Technology. It was an opening. A key, offered with plausible deniability. He nodded slowly. "Technology can be tricky. It's important to make sure everything is secure. You never know who might be listening." Her eyes met his, and for a brief second, the mask slipped. He saw a flicker of shared understanding, of a long-simmering resentment that mirrored his own. Then it was gone. "Have a good weekend, Liam," she said, and turned back to her tomatoes. He walked away, his heart beating a little faster. The plan was accelerating. He now had a potential ally, a woman who held the keys to the kingdom. He had been underestimated his whole life, but he was beginning to realize that he was not the only one. And the combined power of the overlooked was a force that men like Julian Croft could never anticipate. The following week at the office was thick with a new kind of tension. Liam felt like he was moving through water, every interaction freighted with hidden meaning. He avoided any direct conversation with Isabel, communicating only through polite, professional emails. He knew she was taking a great risk, and he would not endanger her. But a silent understanding now existed between them. When their paths crossed in the hallway, a brief, almost imperceptible nod was exchanged. It was enough. Meanwhile, his home life continued its slow, painful decay. Clara's nervousness had grown. She watched him constantly, trying to read his moods, to understand the new distance he had put between them. She suggested they go out to dinner, see a movie, take a weekend trip. She was trying to repair something, but she didn't know what was broken, or she was unwilling to name it. Liam politely declined each suggestion, citing a heavy workload. The lie was a shield for them both. For him, it preserved the secrecy of his plan. For her, it allowed her to maintain the fiction that their problems were external, a matter of stress and scheduling, not a fundamental shattering of trust. One evening, she confronted him more directly. He was in his study, the leather ledger open on his desk as he updated it with the day's market shifts. She came and stood in the doorway. "We don't talk anymore, Liam." He looked up from his work, his face calm. "I'm here. We can talk." "No, I mean really talk," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Something is wrong. You've been so distant." Ever since Julian's party. Is it about that toast? I know he can be a bit much, but that's just his way. He closed the ledger, the soft thud of the leather cover sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. His way is to humiliate people for sport, Clara. And you sat there and smiled. What was I supposed to do? Make a scene? She demanded, her defensiveness rising. It's your boss, Liam. Sometimes you just have to play the game. Is that what you're doing? He asked, his voice dangerously soft. Playing the game. She flinched as if struck. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, he said, standing up and walking towards her. He stopped a few feet away. I'm just asking what the rules are, because I don't think I know them anymore. She couldn't meet his eyes. I love you, Liam, she whispered, the words sounding hollow, rehearsed. Do you? He asked, a genuine, sorrowful curiosity in his voice. Or do you love the idea of me? The reliable, stable man who pays the mortgage while you look for something more exciting. Tears welled in her eyes. They might have even been real. But Liam felt nothing. He had moved beyond that. He was an observer now, collecting the final pieces of data before the great reckoning. She fled the room, and he was left standing in the silence, the weight of his secret knowledge a heavy cloak on his shoulders. Tuesday arrived, the day of the investor's call. Liam's focus at work was absolute. He completed his tasks with his usual quiet efficiency, his outward demeanor betraying none of the high-stakes gamble that was about to unfold. At precisely 2 p.m., the time Isabel had indicated the call would begin, Liam opened a discreet piece of software he had installed on his personal laptop at home, a program of his own design. He entered a long, complex access key that Isabel had sent him the night before, disguised within an innocuous email about catering arrangements for an upcoming meeting. His screen flickered, and then a window opened. It was a live audio feed. The acoustics were perfect. He could hear the shuffle of papers, the soft clink of a glass being set down. Then, Julian's voice, smooth and confident. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Q3 investors call for Croft Holdings. For the next hour, Liam listened. Julian was a masterful salesman. He painted a glowing picture of the company's performance, alluding to a major upcoming expansion in the tech sector. He was charming, persuasive, and utterly dishonest. Liam cross-referenced Julian's claims in real time with the financial model he had built. The discrepancies were glaring. Julian was inflating revenue projections, misrepresenting assets, and concealing a mountain of toxic debt. It was a house of cards, and Julian was trying to keep it from collapsing by luring in new investment. But the real prize came at the end of the call, after the investors had signed off. Julian, thinking the line was disconnected, let out a long sigh. Liam heard the sound of a drink being poured. God, I hate those vultures, Julian muttered to himself. Then, another voice, Clara's. You were brilliant, she said, her voice close, intimate. Liam's hands tightened into fists. She was there, in Julian's home office, in the middle of a workday. It's easy to be brilliant when the sheep are so eager to be fleeced, Julian said with a cynical laugh. Did you see the stock jump when I hinted at the Ethelred acquisition? They have no idea it's a phantom. A complete fabrication to drive up the price before I dump my personal shares. Liam's breath caught in his throat. It was a confession, a clear, unambiguous admission of market manipulation and insider trading. It was more than he could have ever hoped for. Isn't that illegal? Clara asked, a note of what might have been concern in her voice. It's only illegal if you get caught, my love, Julian purred. And men like me don't get caught. We have men like your husband to make sure the numbers all add up. He's a genius at making fantasy look like fact, even if he doesn't know he's doing it. It's his one, pathetic little talent. Liam calmly hit record. He captured the last 30 seconds of the conversation. A perfect, damning loop of Julian's arrogance and criminality. He saved the file, encrypted it, and backed it up to 3 separate secure servers. He had it. The weapon was forged. He closed the laptop, a profound, chilling calm settling over him. He felt no rage, no jealousy, only the cold satisfaction of a strategist whose plan had come to fruition. They had called him a number cruncher, a man of details, a pathetic talent. They were about to find out just how powerful details could be. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place the next day. A company-wide email announced the annual Croft Holdings Charity Gala, to be held in 2 weeks' time at Julian's estate. It was Julian's crowning social event of the year, a self-congratulatory spectacle where he played the role of benevolent philanthropist. The email noted that Julian would be making a special announcement during the evening regarding the future of the company. Liam knew this was it. This would be the stage. Julian, in his own home, surrounded by his sycophants, at the very peak of his arrogance. It was perfect. The symmetry was poetic. Julian's downfall would happen in the same place where Liam's humiliation had been so cruelly cemented. The intervening 2 weeks were the quiet before the storm. Liam moved through his days with an almost preternatural calm. He and Clara existed in a state of suspended animation, cohabiting the same space but occupying different worlds. The silence between them was no longer tense. It was funereal. They were living in the ghost of a marriage, and both of them knew it. Clara made one last, desperate attempt at reconciliation. "Liam, please," she said one night, her face pale and strained. "Whatever this is, whatever I've done, we can fix it. Just talk to me." Liam looked at her, and for a moment, he felt a flicker of the man he used to be, the husband who would have pulled her into his arms and promised that everything would be okay. But that man was gone, burned away by the acid of her betrayal. "There's nothing to talk about, Clara," he said, his voice gentle but final. "Some things can't be fixed. They can only be ended." The finality in his tone silenced her. She seemed to shrink, the fight going out of her. From that moment on, she simply waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for, but the sense of impending doom was a constant presence in their apartment. On the day of the gala, Liam went about his routine with methodical precision. He went to the gym. He ate a healthy lunch. He reviewed the audio file and the financial evidence one last time, ensuring everything was in order. He had sent a copy of the evidence to his lawyer, with instructions to release it to the SEC and the press at a specific time that evening. He had also arranged for a significant transfer of his personal funds, moving them into new, untouchable accounts. He was severing every tie, cutting every cord. When he got home, Clara was already dressed. She was wearing a stunning, backless red dress, a dress he had never seen before. It was a Julian dress, a dress bought to be seen in Julian's world, on Julian's arm. "You look beautiful," Liam said, and he meant it. She was beautiful, a beautiful, tragic stranger. He dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored dark suit. He was not there to impress. He was there to officiate a funeral. They drove to Julian's estate in silence, the same silence that had followed them home from the dinner party weeks before. But this time, it was not Liam's silence. It was hers. The gala was even more opulent than the dinner party. A marquee had been erected on the vast lawn. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees, and a string quartet played softly in the background. The air buzzed with the self-important chatter of the city's financial elite. Julian was in his element, a king surveying his court. He and Clara moved through the crowd, a power couple in their prime. They held hands. They laughed. They accepted the compliments and congratulations of their guests. Liam watched them from the edge of the crowd, a ghost at the feast. He nursed a single glass of sparkling water, his senses sharp, his mind clear. He saw Isabel near the catering tent, her face a mask of professional calm. But when her eyes met his across the lawn, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Everything was in place. At 10 o'clock, Julian stepped up to a small stage at the front of the marquee. A hush fell over the crowd. Clara stood just to the side of the stage, looking up at him with adoration. "Friends, colleagues," Julian began, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support such a worthy cause. It is in the spirit of building a better future that I want to share some exciting news. He paused for dramatic effect. Croft Holdings is on the cusp of its greatest chapter yet. We are about to finalize an acquisition that will revolutionize the tech industry and deliver unprecedented returns for our investors. The future has never been brighter. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Julian beamed, soaking in the adulation. He raised a hand for silence. But this isn't just about business. It's about partnership. About finding that person who shares your vision, your passion, your killer instinct. His eyes found Clara's, and he smiled a deep, intimate smile. And I am thrilled to say I have found that partner. In every sense of the word. It was the moment, the perfect, self-aggrandizing, public declaration. Liam began to move, walking calmly and deliberately from the back of the tent towards the stage. A few people turned to look at him, their expressions of mild curiosity turning to confusion as he didn't stop. He reached the steps of the stage just as Julian was raising his glass for another toast. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply walked up the steps and stood beside him. Julian turned, his smile freezing on his face. "Liam, what are you doing?" "I'm in the middle of something." "I know," Liam said, his voice calm and clear, amplified by the microphone Julian had just been using. "I just have a few details to add." A murmur went through the crowd. Clara's face had gone white, her eyes wide with panic. "This isn't the time or the place, my friend," Julian said, his voice tight with forced joviality as he tried to put a hand on Liam's shoulder to lead him away. Liam didn't move. "I think it's the perfect time and place," he said, turning to face the stunned audience. "Julian is right. The future is about partnership. It's about trust. It's also about the things we think are hidden in plain sight. Like a bottle of valerius cologne in another man's bathroom." A collective gasp went through the room. Clara looked like she was going to faint. Julian's face, which had been a mask of geniality, was now contorting with rage. "Get off my stage, Sterling. You're drunk." "I've never been more sober in my life," Liam said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing back on Julian. He began his list of grievances, his voice never rising, each word a precisely placed stone. It started with the cologne. Then there were the late nights at the gallery, the secret smiles. The way you touched my wife's hand at your dinner party, thinking no one would notice. He turned to Clara. "And you stood by and watched him insult me in my own home. You smiled and played the part, trading your integrity for a taste of this hollow, gilded life." Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Liam turned back to Julian, whose face was now a mottled purple. "But this isn't just about a tawdry affair. That's just a symptom of a deeper sickness. A sickness of arrogance. The belief that you are above the rules." He pulled his phone from his pocket. "You see, you thought I was just a number cruncher, Julian. A man who only saw the details. You were right. I do see the details. And I hear them, too." He pressed a button on his phone, and the audio file played, Julian's voice filling the silent tent, clear as a bell. "The Ethelred acquisition? They have no idea it's a phantom. A complete fabrication to drive up the price before I dump my personal shares. It's only illegal if you get caught, my love. And men like me don't get caught." The silence that followed was absolute, profound. Every face in the crowd was turned to Julian, their expressions a mixture of shock, horror, and for some of his rivals, barely concealed glee. Julian stood frozen, his mouth agape, the color drained from his face. He looked like a statue caught in the moment of its own collapse. "As of 5 minutes ago," Liam continued, his voice cutting through the silence, "a full dossier containing that recording, along with a complete forensic analysis of your company's fraudulent accounting, was delivered to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. It was also delivered to every major news outlet in the country." He looked at the stunned faces of the investors in the crowd. "I'd advise you to sell your stock in Croft Holdings first thing in the morning. Though I suspect the SEC will have already frozen all trading." He then delivered the final, quiet bomb. You see, Julian, your biggest mistake wasn't the fraud, or even the affair. Your biggest mistake was your core assumption. You assumed you were the most powerful person in the room because you were the richest. You assumed I needed your job, your approval. You assumed my life was small because it was quiet. He allowed a small, cold smile to touch his lips. For the past 10 years, I have been managing my own portfolio. My pathetic little talent, as you called it, has done quite well for me. To be precise, my personal net worth is currently about 12 times that of your entire fraudulent company, pre-collapse. I don't need your job. I never did. I was just waiting for the right moment to leave. The reversal of fortune was total biblical. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Julian, the titan of industry, was a common criminal. Liam, the quiet analyst, was a financial powerhouse. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been utterly and irrevocably inverted. Liam looked at Clara one last time. Her face was a mask of utter devastation. The ruin of her choices laid bare. She wasn't looking at Julian anymore. She was staring at Liam, at the stranger he had become, or perhaps, the man he had been all along. The man she had never bothered to see. "Our marriage is over, Clara," he said. His voice no longer cold, but filled with a deep, weary sadness. "Your things will be packed and sent to you. The divorce papers will be delivered tomorrow." He placed the microphone carefully back on its stand. He turned and walked down the steps, the crowd parting for him as if he were a king. He didn't look back. He walked out of the tent, into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of 2 lives and 1 empire collapsing behind him. He was finally free. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The first news alerts hit people's phones before Liam had even reached the end of Julian's long, winding driveway. Croft Holdings CEO accused of massive fraud. Trading halted. By the time he was home, the story was leading every news channel. His apartment, the one he had returned to in a fog of sickness just a few weeks ago, was now a sanctuary of silence. He poured himself a glass of water and sat in his study, the leather ledger open before him. It was over. The days that followed were a blur of headlines. Julian Croft was arrested in a pre-dawn raid, emerging from his glass mansion in handcuffs, his face ashen, his expensive suit rumpled. His assets were frozen, his company imploded, and his powerful friends deserted him overnight. The man who had seemed untouchable was revealed to be nothing more than a common thief in a better suit. Isabelle Dubois, granted immunity for her cooperation, resigned quietly and moved to a small coastal town to open a bookshop, finally free from the toxicity of her long career. Clara called him dozens of times. He didn't answer. She left long, rambling voicemails, alternating between tearful apologies, bitter accusations, and desperate pleas. She hadn't known about the fraud, she swore. She had been foolish, blinded by the lifestyle, but she wasn't a bad person. She still loved him. Liam listened to one of them, then deleted the rest without hearing them. It didn't matter if she had known about the fraud. She had known about the affair. She had known Julian was a cruel, arrogant man who enjoyed humiliating her husband, and she had chosen him anyway. She had made her choice not just between 2 men, but between 2 ways of being in the world. Her apologies were the pleas of a woman who had lost her bet, not the contrition of a person who understood the depth of her moral failure. His lawyer handled everything. The divorce was quick and uncontested. Clara, through her own lawyer, tried to make a claim on his fortune, the fortune she had never known existed. But Liam had been as meticulous in his legal preparations as he had been in his financial ones. A prenuptial agreement signed years ago when they had nothing, and his carefully documented, separately managed assets made her claim fruitless. She was left with a modest settlement, the contents of her closet, and the ruin of her reputation. Liam heard through a mutual acquaintance that she had moved back in with her parents in a small town upstate, the bright lights of the city and its promises of glamour extinguished for her forever. He felt no satisfaction in this, only a quiet, profound pity for the woman she could have been. Months later, Liam sat on the veranda of a small, beautifully designed house overlooking the ocean. He had left the city, left the world of finance, and was now quietly managing his own wealth and consulting for a few select nonprofits whose missions he believed in. The air was clean, the only sounds the cry of gulls and the rhythmic crash of waves on the shore below. The frantic, competitive noise of his old life was a distant memory. He had won. He had achieved the vindication he sought. The arrogant had been brought low, the enabler had faced the consequences of her choices, and he had emerged not just intact, but stronger. Yet, he felt no sense of triumph, no lingering desire for revenge. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind not emptiness, but a clean, quiet space. He thought about the nature of strength. Julian's strength had been a performance loud, aggressive, built on a foundation of dominance and fear. It had been a brittle strength, shattering at the first real impact. Liam's own strength had been quiet, patient, internal. It was the strength of deep roots, of a foundation built on integrity and self-knowledge. He hadn't needed the world to see it. He had only needed to know it was there. The real victory, he realized, wasn't the destruction of Julian Croft. It was his own survival. It was the preservation of his own character in the face of profound betrayal. He could have become bitter, cruel, vindictive. He could have used his wealth to torment them, to grind them into dust. But he had chosen another path. He had chosen justice, not revenge. He had exposed the truth and then walked away, leaving the consequences to unfold as they must. He had maintained his own moral high ground, and in doing so had saved himself. He looked out at the endless expanse of the ocean, a symbol of the vast, open future that now lay before him. The pain of what Clara had done would fade, becoming a scar that reminded him not of the wound, but of his own capacity to heal. True worth, he now knew, was not measured in stock prices or social status. It was measured in character. It was the quiet dignity you maintained when the world tried to humiliate you. It was the patience to wait for the right moment. It was the wisdom to know that the greatest power is the power you never have to show. What do you think is the most important quality in a person? The strength they show to the world, or the integrity they hold in private? This story shows how easily we can mistake one for the other. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this story of quiet vindication satisfying, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption. We all face our own battles, and sometimes the quietest warriors win the most important wars.